to the Natural History Project. And many of you have already taken part in one or two of our studies, and I'd like to tell you primarily about the first one. I want to point out that this is maybe a little bit different than other studies you might have participated in, where investigators came to you and said, okay, here's a questionnaire, please fill it out. Because we didn't do that. We went to you and said, what's important to you? What should we be focusing on? Don't just give us a checklist. We don't want to know that, yes, there's communication problems, yes, there's walking problems. We really wanted to understand the nature of those problems, how often certain problems occurred, how severe they were, and their variability from your perspective, in your words. And then very important to me was to report the results back to family groups through information on your websites. And we have sent an infographic, which we will update. There are a few typos in it, I'll fix that. Webinars like this, and eventually dissemination of information to family, scientific, and provider communities through publication and presentation at meetings. If you're interested in our results, you can just go to our website. There are many ways to get there, but this is an easy way to find it, and just look at the result icon. So I'd like to tell you about your group, specifically the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome part of the study. And again, there were several others from Dravet syndrome and others that I'll tell you about in a little bit. But we had 37 amazing parents who took the survey, and it was a long survey, roughly half and half female and male, a little bit more on the male side. Most of your young people, while young, are still not young children. Most of your members were 10 years and older, or most of those who took the survey were. And interestingly for me, about 60% of you did not know why your child had Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And that's a big gap that I hope we can fill in the future. Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, by definition, is a seizure disorder. And your children have seizures, you know that. A lot have convulsions, absence, and tonic seizures. Those are sort of the defining seizures, or can be the defining seizures of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, but so many other types as well. And most of your children had, of course, multiple seizures. So I'm not really telling you anything you haven't known already, but here it is in your words. The age at onset, and this is really important, the age of the first seizure is about 6 months. As young as a day, as old as 6 years in the group that took part in the study. 90% of your children had had a first seizure by 3 years. But this is really important. When they had that first seizure, almost none of them, I'm going to bet, was diagnosed as having Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. That's something that comes along a few years later, and it's something that develops. And that's why when you look at that donut for the ages, you see so few under 4 years and under. Very few of them have been diagnosed by that age. So Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and seizures. Tracy Dixon Salazar told me that you are the sort of founding member of the Really Crappy Seizure Club, and boy, do I understand that. We asked you not for an entire history of your child's seizures, but just what's going on right now, just to get a snapshot. 70% of you said that in the past week, your child had a seizure at least every day, at least one seizure a day in the past week. A small group, this little sliver up here in what blue, no seizures in the past week, but for the most part, everyone's having seizures at least several days a week. And when your children have a seizure, it's not just 1 or 2. A few, yes, it's 1 or 2 on days when seizures occur, but many of you have up to 10 and some more than 10. And importantly, some parents said, I really don't know, it's just all over the place. And that's something that we often don't take into account. When do seizures happen? Do you know when they're going to happen? And the answer is, yeah, sometimes, because there are factors that will set your child off and have seizures. 58% of you identified triggers. And interestingly, almost all of those involved illness or temperature change. So it could be an illness, a fever, it could be changes in ambient temperature, or even a bath. Another good proportion had seizures with visual stimulation, lights, patterns, and another quarter with emotional excitement. And it could be either positive or negative excitement. But overall, half of you said there was moderate to a lot of unpredictability when seizures occurred. There was one predictable thing though, and that was that seizures tended to occur a lot in sleep. They occurred during the day as well, but the vast majority of you said that your children had seizures several nights every week. 42%, 6 to 7 nights a week, 33%, 3 to 5 nights a week. Together, that's 75% of you said your children are having seizures more than half of the nights every week. In addition to seizures disturbing sleep, your children also just wake up for other reasons. About 39% wake up at least 3 nights a week, 3 to 7 nights a week, 21%, 6 or 7 nights a week. A lot of disturbances. Not surprisingly, you tend to monitor your child's sleep. 81% of you currently monitor children's sleep, and the methods vary, and many of you use multiple methods. The most common, though, that you reported was video monitoring, followed by co-sleeping, or at least having someone else in the room. It might be a nurse, but at least someone else in the room with the child. And I realize that some of these children are adults. But audio monitoring, movement monitoring, some use pulse oximetry, and some of you have service dogs that help you keep track of your children's sleep. Almost all of you said that your child had at some point experienced a long seizure, 10 minutes or more. In the 6 months prior to taking the survey, a third of you reported that your children had had long seizures. Almost all of those went to the emergency department at least once, and 15% of you just in the past 6 months had gone multiple times. I was trying to imagine what that's like. I think each of my children has been in the emergency department once so far in his or her life, and one's almost 30 and the other's 26. And I hope I didn't just jinx myself, but going multiple times is really quite extraordinary. Half of you have used seizure rescue medications in the past 6 months, and that breaks down into roughly a quarter who use them 1 to 9 times. A quarter of you use them 10 or more times, which is a huge number of rescue doses. Of those who reported using rescue medications, over half of you said that you either almost always or definitely always needed to use a second dose. Those rescue medications are not doing what you need them to do. And your most common medications for rescue purposes are Klonopin and Diastat. In addition to the rescue meds, almost half of you had used bridge medications at least once. And by that, I mean a medication that's used not to stop an ongoing seizure, but in a situation where you suspect your child is at risk of having a lot of seizures that day when sick or something else has happened. About 57% of you said you had a seizure rescue plan. And this is really important because of those who didn't have a rescue plan, well, 30% with recent prolonged seizures didn't have a plan, 38% who went to the ED 1 or more times, half of those who used bridge medications, and just over half of those who used rescue medications didn't have a plan. And this is really an opportunity for increased communication with your providers and with your schools. So that's the seizures. It's pretty rough, and it could get rougher, but I'm going to stop there for now. I want to point out the other side of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which everyone acknowledges, but we haven't really put flesh to those bones, and that's what I'm hoping to do a little bit of right now. So we know that in the definitions of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, we hear about the moderate to severe cognitive disabilities, cognitive impairment, profound deleterious effect on intellectual and psychosocial function. But what exactly does that mean? With you and others from the DEE community, we started understanding how to ask questions that were meaningful to you, that would allow you to tell us about your experiences. And this is what we're learning. In the LGS community, almost a third of your children require some kind of wheeled mobility device at home or in the school. This isn't out in the community, but for fairly short distances. About a quarter of your children do not manipulate objects effectively with their hands. They may bat at things and try to grab at things, but they're not really able to hold things and do something purposeful with them in an effective manner. That goes along with not being able to feed themselves, although of those who could not feed themselves, 29% of your children also have G-tubes. So there's a lot of dependence for some basic survival needs. Half of your children do not use spoken language. They may have some sign and some symbols, but half don't use spoken language. And just over half of you indicated that your children inconsistently or rarely communicate even with people they know well, that their parents, their siblings, their daily caregivers. What do young people with LGS do? Well, a little over a third can feed themselves with a spoon and fork. That is something. About 42% can drink from an open cup. Self-care is limited, but a quarter can brush their own teeth. 17% only are completely independent for toilet use, and that may be a combination of cognitive issues and physical disability. We did not distinguish those. 29% can wash and dry their hands, and 21% can get themselves dressed effectively. And when I say that they can do this effectively by themselves physically, they may need some reminders or some prompts, verbal prompts, but physically they can carry out these tasks and understand them. Half of your children like to use touchscreen devices, and I've seen some beautiful examples of that at the last LGS meeting in Seattle. You indicated that about 30% have some simple academic skills. They can recognize letters or numbers. They might be able to write their name. They might be able to recognize some simple words. And almost half like to scribble or draw with a crayon or pencil. In terms of behavior, 35% were diagnosed with autism, and another 23% you said had features of autism. And I want to make a point that in people who have intellectual disability, the diagnosis of autism is somewhat fraught, and it's often used instead of intellectual disability. I consider in someone with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, these two, the features and diagnosis, are pretty much identifying similar children. So that's about half of your children with autism or autistic-like behaviors. This was really important, and I want to make, just kind of emphasize it. 19% of you said that your child had been diagnosed with anxiety, and another 8% said had features of anxiety. That can be part of autism, but in someone with intellectual disability, I think we kind of forget that they can have mood disorders too. And it can be hard to figure that out. So I would just urge you to be aware that this could be something that affects your child, and to talk to your physicians about that, and possibly a behavioral specialist as well. Don't ignore it. And then 27%, about a quarter, have been diagnosed with ADHD. In terms of difficult behaviors, I thought it was so interesting that if we look at disruptive behaviors, these are things that parents generally don't like. It's not that they're not there, but they're not overwhelming. Frequent frustration, about 25% of you said, yes, that was pretty typical of your child. But if you look at these other things like verbal aggression, physical aggression, disobedience, temper tantrums, those are not super common. It's not that they don't happen, and if they do happen, I know they must be devastating. But this is not the most common thing that we see in children with Lennox and young adults with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. The mood changes a little bit more, and the repetitive behaviors, I think that goes along very much with the high diagnosis and reporting of features of autism. Somewhat more common were your safety concerns. A lot of young people with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome need line of sight supervision. You need to know where they are. They can wander off, they can get into things. So that's a really important issue for you. Somewhat less important, but I'm pretty sure as they get older, a very important issue becomes sort of a lack of stranger danger, being a little bit too friendly on approaching people your child does not know. And then we asked about all these negative things. We also asked about some really positive things. And it was so lovely to see how many of you described your children as being happy and sweet, saying that they showed concern for others. Even with all the difficulties that they have, they did show concern for others, that empathy that is so lovely to see. And about half of them get along really well with adults. We also talked about things your children enjoy doing, and it was so interesting to see almost all of them, like singing songs, listening to music, or being sung to. Music is magic. Almost all also like playing with water, and that can go along with the autistic features, but let's face it, water is really therapeutic, and a lot of your children enjoy that. And then being read to. So they do enjoy that social interaction, being sung to, being read to on their level. When you think about what it takes to take care of a child or an adult with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, it is a little bit overwhelming. Your children see a lot of therapists. A lot of your children see a lot of therapists, I should say. 3/4 are seeing a speech therapist, almost as many an occupational therapist, and over half have a physical therapist. You also have a good number who are seeing some kind of behavioral specialist. In terms of physicians, almost everyone is currently seeing a neurologist. You have special needs dentists, orthopedists, neurosurgeons, ophthalmologists, all of these different specialists who are involved in your care, and that is a lot to keep track of. When we look at your children and who's involved in their care, the median number of different therapists and medical specialists involved in their care at any one time is 6. That means about half of you are seeing fewer than 6 specialists, and half of you are seeing 6 or more specialists at any one time. 2/3 of you said that your children go to 2 or more different therapy appointments every week. That means you're on the road a lot, and some of you have 4 or more. And this is really important because, and I think it may have to do with your children being older and a lot in adult care, but 43% of you felt that care was not well coordinated across the different providers. And a lot of you said, it's up to me. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done. But you expressed some real concerns about that. 70% of you said you had other children, and we asked about the impact on your other children of having a sibling with a disorder as severe as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. 2/3 of you said it definitely limited the amount of attention you could give to other children. Not just a little bit, but it really had a big impact in that regard. 69% said your other children had to grow up faster. But despite all this, I was so heartened by, we asked, did your other children resent their sibling who had Lennox-Gastaut syndrome? And 2/3 of you said, not at all. And that was just really kind of remarkable. I have seen this, that the siblings of children with such difficulties turn out to be amazing people. Some of the comments that you shared with us about your other siblings, one mom said that, my adult children still have needs and I can't respond to them. And she expressed having this overwhelming guilt about not being able to drop things and go to another state to help her daughter who needed help, but she couldn't do that. A couple of parents talked about how their adult children were influenced in their choice of career. One daughter became a preschool intervention specialist, and another parent said that their other children definitely were influenced in their choice of career by their siblings' epilepsy. There are some sweet points among this bitterness, but on the whole, the impact that this condition has on parents is pretty heavy. 82% of you said that life feels like a roller coaster, and about as many report moderate to severe fatigue. You're not alone. You all feel this way. That is the story that we have gotten so far from our natural history project. We have started to define the landscape of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, not in terms of saying it's big and it's bad, but what does it really mean to have moderate and severe disability? What does that look like? And very importantly to me, what can young people with severe disabilities do? What are their abilities and what can we build on? The reason natural history has become such an important issue today is that there are a lot of efforts to develop therapies for rare diseases, and the FDA has stepped in and very strongly stated that if a drug company or some other kind of company wants to develop a treatment for a rare disease, it needs first to understand the full range of disease manifestations. So much of what we have done has just focused on the seizures, and I can completely understand why. They are crashing emergencies that pop up throughout the day without warning, but there's more there too. Here's an example. Many of you may have participated in the cannabidiol trial for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and it was all about seizures. And what they did was look at, if you go to the appendix, the online appendix, an 18-page appendix on pages 16 and 17, you can find out a little bit about the effect of treatment on sleep. It was nil. On quality of life, again nil, and on adaptive behavior as measured by the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales. Again, no effect. But this incredibly important component of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome has sort of been shunted aside with the laser focus on seizures. The FDA's natural history mandate is not just simply, oh, so we can understand natural history, it's really part of trial readiness, because they emphasize that the full range of disease manifestations, along with the patient community input, helps investigators to select the correct clinical endpoints to study, what's important to change, and then to identify or develop sensitive and specific outcome measures. The ones I just showed you in the cannabidiol trial were not designed for use in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. We need something appropriate for LGS. And that's where the ability study comes in. This study, again, many of you participated in. It took place for 10 days in February this year. 135 parents participated, 39 from your community. Thank you. Just amazingly awesome. We also had young people from these other communities, Dravet, KCMB1, KCNQ2, and SCN2A. Just amazing participation from everyone, and it was a real gift to us. What this study is helping us do, in addition to selecting the clinical endpoints, which you've already helped us do, it's helping us identify sensitive and specific outcome measures. We talk about gross motor ability, and we sort of measure it from crawling to walking to running to mountain climbing and skydiving and doing all that other stuff. And if what we do is take this approach to someone from the DEE world, someone with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, who is perhaps in a therapeutic stroller and is strapped in and with head support because he or she cannot maintain posture and his head drops, this is just not, this walk, crawl, run, fly is not a helpful scale to be looking at. Think about communication. The typical approach is babbling in a baby to talking to each other, and eventually you have someone who can stand up and give a speech in a lecture hall. In the DEEs and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, we are working at the level of perhaps eye gaze and assistive devices and gestures, conventional or otherwise. That's the level at which we have to be working, and that's what the ability study has helped us understand. The next piece that the FDA emphasizes is that we need to conduct a study of sufficient duration to capture clinically meaningful outcomes. That means things that are important to you, and to study the variability in their over the course of the disease. And we're just starting to do that. And I want to tell you about two programs that we're just starting to get going. One is with the Dravet Syndrome Foundation, where we are planning a longitudinal study of gait. Some of you may know that children with Dravet syndrome tend to walk pretty well initially, but once they hit adolescence, they have a degeneration in their gait. They develop this crouch gait, and many of them become dependent on a wheelchair or mobility device. So we're going to study that prospectively, because gait was something that the Dravet Syndrome Foundation said they wanted to study and target in future trials. And then with families SCN2A, we're doing a longitudinal study looking at mobility, communication, and behavior. Again, factors that are important to them and that they would like to target in future trials. Your comments from the Natural History Project about what you would like to learn from a natural history study are here, but there are many. Some were very altruistic, how to prevent other families from having to go through this. One parent said, I would like an understanding of severity, like a scale or continuum to help with perspective. And I'm hoping that maybe some of what I just showed you starts to provide that. And there are other things as well. Sleep and behavior are hot topics for our families, and then also the effects on siblings. So there are many things that as a community you could start to work on, and we're starting to develop some of the ways that you could do that. I want to thank you so much for your participation in our studies so far, for the opportunity to talk with you. And I'm going to leave you with this word cloud. I'm a novice at doing this. I'm just starting, but this came from comments you made about your children. And there are lots of extra words in there, but I think it's so telling that the word in the middle, the biggest word, is loving, and then proud and strong and happy. So with that, I'll thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you have now.
Thank you so much, Anne. I actually did receive a couple of questions emailed to me even before this began, so I would like to ask those questions first.
Sure.
Has anyone completely controlled their seizures or just managed to a minimum on meds with a quality of life balance? And is there a quality of life balance and lives with ongoing seizures? I think there might have been a little bit of a typo in there, but I guess it's all about quality of life with and without seizures.
Right. That's a great question. I think I don't have any one answer for that. I can give you instead two answers. One is that in general, when seizures are controlled, quality of life is just better, period. When your child is falling, hitting his head, bumping, knocking you over, all of the things that happen during seizures, in and out of the emergency department, getting those seizures under control is fantastic. My other answer to that, though, is that anecdotally, and it's something that we really need to study systematically, but anecdotally, some parents have reported, and I'm not necessarily from Lennox-Gastaut, but I don't think it really matters. Some parents have reported that when their children's seizures are under control, that's when they start to see the behaviors coming out, because now they're not constantly pre-ictal, ictal, or post-ictal. They are not full of loaded on benzodiazepines. You start to see who they are, and they are impaired. So that then becomes a little bit, I don't want to say it's a double-edged sword, but it's not that it solves everything. It can now unmask some other issues.
Thank you. The second question is, I'm wondering if there are different types of LGS. My son's seizures are caused by severe brain damage at birth. Are there other kids who have, I'm sorry.
Was that you?
Are there other kids who have seizures due to brain damage? Does that type of LGS have a name? What treatments work for this type?
Oh gosh, that's an amazing question. As you know, LGS is not a disease. It's not like you have a very specific cause and a very specific disease that follows. I think of LGS as a sort of a conflagration of neurodevelopmental missteps. It's something that happens in the developing brain, and it can happen for a multitude of reasons. And that multitude of reasons gives us some ideas of how we might prevent it in the first place. For example, and this is going to bring me back to the question if I wander too much, but for example, right now there's an ongoing study of children with tuberous sclerosis to see if early treatment can prevent infantile spasms. And as you know, that can progress to Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. So that's very specific to the cause before LGS ever occurs. But LGS comes about from the brain having developed some very maladaptive response to a whole host of things going on. And we don't understand it well. I can wave my hands, but I don't think anyone truly knows why LGS occurs. Given that you have LGS, are there some treatments that are better than others? And that we just don't know at this time. It's a fantastic question. It's probably something we should start to study. I love the question, but I do not have an answer for that.
Great, thank you, Anne. Okay, and some of the questions that have been typed in. The first one is from Elliot. My son is 14. His first myoclonic seizure was at 3 months, which was always the sticking point on whether or not he has LGS. Can they start that early?
Yes. In fact, in my own research, from a very different study in the state of Connecticut where we looked at all children with epilepsy throughout the state, very few had LGS as their initial diagnosis. I think we had 4. By the time we finished follow-up, we had 22. The age at onset of epilepsy in that group was the first year of life. A handful had it a little bit older, but almost all of them had their first seizure. And it could be the first day of life, to be honest. So 3 months is not at all unusual. In fact, I would say that's more the rule than the exception.
Thank you. And he had a follow-up question as well. He said, did I hear you correctly that most LGS patients lose the ability to walk around 11 years old? The reason he's trying to figure out why he stopped walking.
Actually, I'm so sorry. I think I was talking about Dravet syndrome and why we were doing the gait study with Dravet syndrome. So no, we have not seen that specifically with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. On the other hand, I don't know of anyone who has tried to study it. And I've worked with some other groups where parents have said that their children had started to develop some gait problems, and that this again is something that we should probably start looking at in a systematic manner to find out why, and then also what to do about it.
Thank you. Now the next question is from Crystal, and she asks, has anyone had group B strep when pregnant, and do you think this could cause LGS?
I honestly do not know. We always worry about exposures that occur during pregnancy. I think our most recent big infectious disease scare was Zika virus a few years ago that led to horrific brain malformations. But if your child was not in trouble at the time of birth, if the imaging is normal or typical, never quite sure what normal is, but typical, doesn't stand out. I'm not sure that would be something of concern. I'm not saying that it isn't, I'm not sure that it is. The person to ask would probably be someone who understands neuroimmunology, developmental neuroimmunology, and see if there is any association there.
Deborah asks, how do you feel about VNS for LGS patients when medications have failed?
VNS or RNS are excellent options. They are not cures, they're palliative. And as long as you are comfortable using the magnet and that shouldn't be that huge an issue, I think they're really worth trying. The other thing about VNS is that you can stop it. If it's not like having a piece of brain removed, you can stop your VNS. It is a removable device. So if the seizures are serious enough that you would be willing to go through surgery, I would urge you to consider it strongly. I'm sure there are many other considerations, so that's sort of a blanket statement. Every choice has to be very specifically customized to your child, your provider group, and of course to you.
Great, thank you. From Lisa Silby, can other rare groups get involved with the ongoing study? For example, hypothalamic hamartoma community has approximately 13% LGS diagnosis as well.
Wow. Yeah, we would love to work with some other groups. So, and I've been in touch with the hypothalamic hamartoma group before. I think they took part in the REN study and they were committed to doing that at the time. But if there's interest, by all means, get in touch with me and we'll figure something out.
Thanks. Okay, Lisa, if a young child is on the road to LGS diagnosis, do you feel an earlier intervention with therapies would be beneficial to help with skills they already have so they don't lose them?
We, again, two answers. We don't have the evidence one way or the other. I think all early interventionists would say intervene. Don't lose an opportunity. It's not going to hurt. It could very well help. And I know, at least in the Dravet syndrome field, that is very much the approach that is taken to get those skills in place, to work on them as much as possible to help stave off the effects of the disease. But again, I don't think there is I can't point to a study and say there is evidence saying that this will actually make a difference.
Marcia asks, my son is 50, and when he was 17, he had a corpus callosotomy, which helped decrease the severity of his drop seizures. In 2004, we had a VNS implanted, and he has had one ever since. He is down to 2 meds, which has been helpful. Mobility is an issue and cannot walk without assistance, so a walker is used as well as a wheelchair when needed. Quite a journey. LGS diagnosis was made when he was around 10. So this was more of a comment than a question, but thanks for sharing that, Marcia.
And, I just wanted to say, I think that is, thank you for that, Marcia. And I keep saying your children and then sort of saying young people and then adults with, and the LGS is lifelong. So, I think you're making a really valuable contribution here and bringing up your brother, yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to hear from the older community, or the people with older children, or adult children, because those of us who are heading into that land need to have somebody that we can ask questions of. So that's Linda asks, she says not a question, just an FYI. Her daughter's had seizures from febrile seizures at age 6 months till about 16, multiple meds, none worked until they went on to Onfi, no seizures since she is now 27, and was not diagnosed with LGS until she was 17. And Pamela asks, are there different types of LGS? If so, what are they?
LGS is a really messy diagnosis that's, again, those things I flipped through quickly at the beginning, the seizure types, the EEG, and then variable mention of intellectual or developmental disability and multiple causes. But they've got to be at some level, but we have never studied it at that level to understand. And it would be, the ultimate study right now would be to take everyone with LGS and try to separate out by the underlying cause. And that would be amazing if we could really see if there were differences. And there very well may be. But right now, no, I don't think we distinguish different types of LGS.
Thank you. I'm switching sort of between the chat box and the Q&A. because some people are making some comments and questions as well in the chat box, so I don't want to ignore them. Will we have access to these slides after
Sure.
the
Yeah.
so that will be made. The LGS Foundation will make sure that we can share that with everybody.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Oh, as the parent of a teenager, this is Jen asks this. As a parent of a teenager, I wonder about quality and longevity of life for a person with LGS. Could you speak to this?
I think, was it Marcia who had a 50-year-old brother? Yeah, I think Marcia could probably tell you more. There is increased mortality, in part because of seizures, in part because of the disability that goes along with LGS. So we do see a lot of infections and death from causes such as that. The quality of life is tough. Their quality of life, I don't know. I don't know how they're feeling. I mean, we have a sense that, oh, look, he looked happy today. Who knows? But that's why I mentioned the anxiety. Young people of all ages with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome can still have mood disorders, and we don't always know what's going on. So it's a great question. I wish I had an answer, but I don't think anyone really does.
Thank you. Victoria asks, did anyone who's used Epidiolex or CBD seen an improvement in cognition, slowing regression? We never saw an improvement on seizures with Epidiolex, but when my son went off of it, his ability to walk started to decline. May have been a coincidence, not sure, just curious if other families you interviewed saw a similar effect.
Probably would be best to ask the other families. I very quickly again, and you'll get the slides, but the CBD study that Oren Davinsky published in New England Journal looked just at an overall Vineland, which was not a very sensitive measure in this group. It did not show any changes, and I'm not sure that anyone has looked long-term as to whether there are some changes, some effects on behavior, cognition, or mobility for that matter.
Thank you. Victoria asks also how many families sourced to brain surgery to
referred?
Maybe went to brain surgery, i.e. corpus callosotomy, to get seizure relief and did get a benefit.
It's a good question. Again, I'm not sure. There are studies of the efficacy for seizure control or seizure reduction with corpus callosotomy. I don't believe any is specific to Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. I will take a look though, because that's a really good question, and it's something we should look into. At this point, callosotomy, historically, callosotomy went through a period where it was a very popular sort of surgery. We're a little bit past that, and I think it's fair to say that's not the preferred approach. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most people would say try a VNS first, because that is not, that is reversible. It's not a final operation.
Thank you. And one more from Marcia. She says, I do have one question. He has severe hyperextension of the left knee along with mild hemiparesis of his entire left side. Is that an outcome from so many seizures over the years? I assume so.
It could be. Do you know the cause of his LGS, of why he has this?
Marcia, do you want to type in that? Can you let us know what the cause, if you know the cause? While we're waiting on Marcia's answer, I don't. Is it common to be doing extremely well overall but still have tonic-clonics daily before a major decline?
I think anything's possible. I don't know how common it is, but if there's anything you have all taught me about LGS is that anything's possible.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Marsha just responded. She said, I am guessing it might be a result of having had the corpus callosotomy. This is paresis, and seizures predominantly affected his left side from the age of 17.
It's possible. He may have had a stroke. I was wondering if he'd had a brain injury early on that had led to it, or if a little bit of brain malformation had been found, but it's possible that the seizures have played a role.
Well, I don't see any more quotes. Gabriella says, a comment. She says her son started Epidiolex last January, and on September 6, 2019, he became seizure-free. He has improved since being seizure-free. Way to go. He makes a lot more sounds, can now grab, and he's now working on taking steps. Before being seizure-free, he would have about 20 seizures a day. That's great, Gabriella.
Wow. And thank you for describing your son, because that's exactly what I meant about the outcomes. If you wanted to talk about mobility, he's not running, but he's starting to take steps. And that for him is a huge step. He's babbling. These are the sorts of behaviors that we need to be sensitive to, and not just give someone a Vineland for a 25-year-old and say, oh, yep, he's still very impaired, which is what we get when we use a Vineland.
Well, I don't see any other questions coming in.
Okay.
If anybody has, I'll give it another few seconds if anybody is in the middle of typing something. But of course, I'm a parent also of someone with LGS, so I so look forward to hearing you speak. I've heard you speak before, and I just feel really lucky to have someone out there who's really bringing our voices out, and I couldn't be more grateful to you for, always saying yes when we ask for you to help us with a webinar or anything else. And I think that, we're so lucky to have you as a friend at the LGS Foundation. So, and you love dancing with our kids, which, as we all know, you've already pointed out that they do love music, and it's been proven at our conferences. So thank you so much, Anne, for participating today.
Well, and thank you all. Yeah.
We're just really grateful. And this has been recorded, and it will be available on our website. And you may see Anne again very soon.
I hope so.
upcoming webinars somewhere. So, just we're fans. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Bye.